He did not intend to uncover anything that day. Elias had come to the hills simply to be alone, to step away from the noise that followed him even in silence. The old stone dwelling he borrowed belonged to no one now, resting between olive trees and wind-worn paths. It was the kind of place where time softened its grip, where mornings arrived without urgency. Elias believed rest was all he needed. He was wrong. The discovery happened slowly, the way truth often does. A fragment of parchment lay pressed between two cracked boards beneath the floor, protected more by neglect than design. The script was unfamiliar, not because it was ancient, but because it carried a rhythm that did not belong to spoken language. Elias felt it before he understood it. The words did not explain, they reminded that he had studied spiritual texts for years, taught small gatherings, shared reflections that encouraged calm and compassion. Yet this was different. The fragment did not ask for belief. It asked for recognition. As he traced the markings, a quiet pressure formed behind his chest, not uncomfortable, just present, like a memory resurfacing without images attached. The teaching described no rituals, no commandments, no hierarchy. It spoke of awareness as something stolen gently, not violently. According to the text, humanity had not fallen, it had been distracted. Perception had been guided away from its own depth, trained to search outward instead of inward. Control, the fragment suggested, thrived not through force, but through forgetfulness. Elias hesitated. He knew how these ideas could sound. Over the years, he had seen people chase mystery for escape, turning spirituality into another form of avoidance. But this teaching felt grounded, almost practical. It spoke of ordinary moments, of breath, of rest, of the subtle space between thoughts. It suggested that unseen forces, never named, never dramatized, could influence only what was unconscious. What unsettled him most was a single line near the end of the fragment: "They cannot follow you into remembrance." No explanation followed. No warning. Just that quiet certainty that he spent days returning to the same lines, not reading, but sitting with them. Each time, something loosened inside him. He noticed how often his attention scattered, how easily emotions rose without invitation. He began to sense patterns, not imposed from outside, but reinforced from within. The teaching did not accuse, it observed. When Elias finally spoke about it, he did so carefully. He did not present it as revelation, only as reflection. He mentioned it during a small evening gathering, framed as a question rather than a claim. "What if awakening isn't about gaining something," he asked, "but remembering what was never lost?" The response was subtle but immediate. A few listeners leaned forward. Others shifted uncomfortably. No one argued, yet the room felt different, as if something unspoken had been acknowledged. One woman later told him she couldn't sleep that night, not from fear, but from clarity. Another said he felt watched, not by anything external, but by his own thoughts. Elias realized then that the teaching worked quietly. It did not demand attention, it redirected it. Those who were ready felt drawn inward. Those who were not simply moved on, but resistance appeared as well, though not in obvious ways. Invitations to speak were suddenly withdrawn. Conversations ended sooner than expected. Even friends began to steer discussions back toward safer, familiar ideas. It wasn't hostility. It was avoidance, as if something invisible preferred things remain unchanged. Late one evening, alone again, Elias understood why the fragment had been hidden. Not buried, not destroyed, just set aside. Forgotten truths did not need enemies. Time itself was enough. He felt no urge to convince anyone. The teaching did not spread through persuasion. It spread through recognition. He began sharing it only when asked, and even then, sparingly. The words mattered less than the space they created. Sitting in the dim light, Elias folded the fragment carefully and returned it beneath the floorboards. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was complete. The real work, he sensed, would happen without it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, indifferent and steady. Elias breathed, slowly, and felt something settle. Whatever forces benefited from distraction had no power here. Not in this stillness. Not in this remembering. The change did not announce itself. It arrived as a subtle tension, like a familiar room rearranged while the lights were off. Those who had listened to Elias, even briefly, began to notice small disturbances in their inner rhythm. Thoughts repeated themselves with more insistence. Old worries resurfaced without context. Sleep became lighter, dreams more vivid, not frightening, but strangely instructional. Mara was the first to speak openly about it. She had attended only one gathering, sitting near the back, saying little. A week later, she visited Elias at the stone dwelling, uneasy but composed. She described a sense of resistance that had no clear source. "Every time I sit quietly," she said, "something pulls me back into noise. Not outside noise. Internal." Elias listened without interruption. He recognized the pattern immediately, not as attack, but as friction. Awareness, once stirred, met habits that had long gone unquestioned. The teaching had not caused conflict, it had revealed it. Others experienced the same in different forms. Jonah, a careful thinker who trusted structure, found himself doubting thoughts he once accepted instantly. Lena felt an emotional heaviness whenever she tried to slow her breath, as if stillness itself demanded a price. None of them described visions or external forces. What they described was internal resistance, refined and persistent. Elias was careful not to frame their experiences as a struggle between good and evil. That language, he knew, fed the very patterns the teaching pointed beyond. Instead, he spoke of attention. Of how awareness disrupts systems built on automation. Of how the mind resists losing its position as unquestioned narrator. "What you're feeling isn't opposition," he told them gently. "It's adjustment. Forgetting feels normal because it's familiar. Remembering feels strange because it's quiet." Still, the pull was strong. Some drifted away without explanation. Others stayed close but stopped practicing stillness, choosing discussion over experience. A few grew anxious, searching for reassurance that nothing was wrong. Elias offered none. Reassurance belonged to the mind. What they needed was trust that he noticed the resistance worked best through urgency. The sudden need to be productive. The impulse to check, to plan, to distract. Silence was not attacked directly, it was crowded out. This, the fragment had suggested, was how control maintained itself, not through command, but through momentum. Mara, however, persisted. Each evening, she sat quietly despite the discomfort. She did not force calm. She allowed the unrest to surface without reacting. Over time, something shifted. The pull weakened. The thoughts lost their urgency. She described it one night simply, "It's like they stopped chasing me once I stopped running." Her experience marked a turning point. Elias saw clearly now that remembrance could not be taught. It could only be allowed. The inner conflict was not a test imposed from outside, it was the residue of long-held patterns dissolving. Yet with each person who settled into this quiet clarity, the environment around them seemed to react. Conversations turned shallow. Media felt louder. Even relationships subtly strained, as if depth itself disrupted familiar dynamics. Some were accused of becoming distant. Others were told they were overthinking. Elias addressed this carefully. When you stop feeding certain patterns, he said, they don't disappear quietly. They look for replacement. Don't fight them. Just don't supply them. The most difficult moments came at night. Several spoke of waking suddenly, minds racing, emotions rising without cause. Elias recognized this too. The space between waking and sleep was fragile. It was where habits reasserted themselves most effectively. Not through fear, but through familiarity. He encouraged a simple practice, awareness without effort. No words. No images. Just the sensation of being present. Not trying to achieve calm, but noticing what resisted it. Gradually, the conflict softened. Not vanished, but understood. Those who stayed with the process realized something important: nothing was being taken from them. Only excess noise was falling away. Elias himself felt it as well. The more he rested in awareness, the less reactive he became. The less influence urgency held over him. He saw how easily attention had once been guided by impulse and expectation. Now, there was space. Choice. The teaching had done exactly what it promised. It did not overthrow anything. It revealed what no longer needed to be obeyed. The struggle did not end with victory. It ended with quiet. Those who remained close to the practice stopped describing their experience as conflict at all. There was nothing left to oppose. What once felt like pressure dissolved into background noise, then into absence. Not forcefully removed, just no longer relevant. Elias noticed the shift first in himself. Mornings no longer carried anticipation or dread. They arrived as they were. Thoughts still appeared, but they no longer demanded obedience. Emotions moved through without attaching stories to themselves. He had not become detached from life, he had become less entangled with it. The same was true for the others. Mara spoke less during gatherings, not from withdrawal, but from completion. When she did speak, her words were simple, unembellished. Jonah stopped analyzing the experience altogether. He said reasoning had become unnecessary once he trusted direct awareness. Lena described a lightness that didn't feel like happiness, but stability. None of them claimed special insight. That was the most telling sign. There was no urgency to label the change, no desire to explain it to those who had not asked. Remembrance, once integrated, did not seek validation. What surprised Elias most was how ordinary everything became. The teaching had hinted at this, but living it revealed the truth more clearly. Awakening did not elevate them above others. It returned them to themselves. They still worked, still worried at times, still felt joy and disappointment. The difference was subtle but absolute. None of it defined them anymore. The external world continued as before. Distractions remained abundant. Noise grew louder, not quieter. But it no longer pulled them in the same way. They could engage without being consumed. They could listen without absorbing. The mechanisms that once fed on unconscious reaction found no anchor here. Elias realized then that the forgotten teaching had never been meant to spread widely. It was not designed for movements or systems. It was meant for individuals, quietly, at the moment they were ready. That was why it survived, not through institutions, but through fragments, whispers, pauses. He stopped holding gatherings altogether. Not because the work was finished, but because it no longer required structure. Those who had remembered did not need guidance. Those who had not were not meant to be persuaded. Occasionally, someone new would arrive, drawn by something they couldn't name. Elias would not teach them. He would simply sit with them, allowing stillness to do what words never could. Some stayed. Some left. There was no disappointment either way. The fragment beneath the floor remained untouched. Elias sensed it would remain there long after he was gone. Perhaps someone else would find it. Perhaps not. It no longer mattered. The teaching lived now where it always had, within awareness itself. One evening, as the sun lowered and the wind moved gently through the trees, Elias felt a deep certainty. Whatever thrived on distraction had no place here. Not because it was defeated, but because it had been outgrown. Remembrance, once reclaimed, required no defense. It was self-sustaining. Silent. Unreachable, and that, Elias understood, was the point. If you've stayed with this story until now, take a moment before moving on. Not to analyze what you've heard, not to decide whether you agree or disagree, but simply to notice your own attention. Notice where it rests when nothing is asked of it. That quiet place is more familiar than it seems. Stories like this aren't meant to convince or convert. They exist as mirrors. Sometimes we recognize ourselves in them immediately. Other times, recognition arrives later, unexpectedly, in still moments when nothing is playing and no one is speaking. Let this one sit with you in whatever way feels natural. If this narrative resonated, consider supporting the channel so more reflections like this can be shared. Subscribing helps keep these explorations alive, not through noise, but through continuity. If you feel moved, leave a like, not as approval, but as acknowledgement. And if you know someone who might quietly benefit from this kind of story, sharing it may reach them at exactly the right time. Thank you for spending this time here, unhurried and attentive. Until the next reflection.